Well, folks, back again, and this time with a completely new face, a completely new character, and brand new. I'm just getting to know him. This is Lloyd DeJongh. Am I correct? Is that how you pronounce your name?
DeJongh.
DeJongh. Okay, it's the Dutch way of saying it. DeJongh, which you
Correct.
are. Background now. DeJongh, you are new to our channel. You've never been on PfanderFilms before. Many people probably know you from your own channel, and I'll put the name of your channel. What if you could just give me the name right now? I'll put it right here below.
Lloyd DeJongh, it's my full name.
It's just your name, and here is the URL. You can see it's just down below us. You have been working with Islamic material. Of course, there is some people are, in fact, many people already know you. Quite a few people have asked me to bring you on PfanderFilms so we could actually use your material and get it out to as many people as possible. You know me, Lloyd, I like to get it on as many platforms as we can. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us a background. Tell us where you were born, where you grew up, and why you decided to get into this kind of study, into this kind of research. Over to you, Lloyd.
Oh, thank you. I was born and raised in South Africa. I lived there most of my life. I eventually moved to Dubai, where I found work. I worked the bulk of the time. I spent 11 years in the Middle East, and the majority of that time I worked in national defense, national security. I was a civilian consultant to governments, to law enforcement, to military, armed forces, as well as to industry, to protect them from and advise them in terms of, to protect them from sabotage, let's say, to make sure that I protected for the government critical national infrastructure. So be it industrial areas, be it military bases, be it power stations, nuclear power plants, things of that nature, also borders, and to make sure that these, also for instance, airports, make sure that forces like ISIS did not, and they did attempt to, destroy property, blow up airplanes, kill people in terminals and such. So my job is to make sure that that did not happen.
Okay, so did you say there were attempts while you were on the job, while you were there?
So I would usually operate, very often I would operate with armed security. So I'd be with military escort. No, so I've not been there, but typically I would go just after an attempt would have occurred. Lots of things happen in the Middle East that do not make the news. So my job is to make sure that they didn't happen again. Or
Right.
we would attempt to plan in advance to anticipate what may happen, what may go wrong, and make sure that we prevented these things from happening. So I designed very, very expensive, very large, wide area, long range surveillance systems to protect critical infrastructure from sabotage, from attack.
Well, okay. So, Lloyd, you've had quite a bit of experience then with Islam as well. Obviously, if you're in the Middle
Yeah.
East, you're surrounded by Muslims. You've had Muslim colleagues. You've had certainly in where you did your schooling and things like that. But why suddenly did you want to get involved in the whole historical critique? We call it the historical critique. That's kind of an umbrella subject.
Certainly.
Why did you get involved in this area of research?
Certainly, yeah. So obviously the time that I spent, now there's some wonderful Muslims. I made some great friends, and certainly I enjoyed, but I've traveled extensively. And what I started to see was dysfunction within Islamic society. I started to see the issues that crop up. And I started to ask myself questions about why, what is different about Islamic society? Individuals are wonderful people, and Dubai was a great place. However, you go to Lebanon, you go to Iraq, you go to various places, and you start to see enormous dysfunction, violence, social ills. And I was curious about this. And it was when I went to Lebanon, really, I went to Lebanon, and this is where I realized I needed to try to understand much more about this. Now, I also had relationships with various women in the area. I had long-term relationships with a couple of women, and also just the things I was learning from them, their fear. They were literally frightened of being killed if their family found out. And for me, this was like shocking, and I wanted to understand all of these issues. So after that, and then of course in 2015 there were the attacks in Paris at the Bataclan, for instance, where 86 people were murdered, and I decided to enroll in a course in counterterrorism, which was relevant to my work. And it so turned out that on that enrollment year, I was literally the only person in the entire class that actually had any field experience, that was actually involved in the industry. I also then very rapidly discovered that the man in charge of the course had a heavy, severe bias. He refused to engage in any discussion about the Muslim Brotherhood. He refused to believe that they were anything other than benign. He refused to discuss anything that might be bad about Islam. So that discussion was closed. And in fact, when we were doing different forms of terrorism, different Christian terrorism, Hindu, Buddhist terrorism, they were happy to discuss. When it came to Islamic terrorism, it was like, okay, yeah, well, Islamic terrorism, so it's lovely. Oh boy, look, there's a squirrel. Okay, let's move on to.
Hold on right there. So let me make sure what you're saying is correct. So what you're saying is the ideology of Islam, they were saying, had nothing to do with what was happening on the ground. These were just wackos. These were just weirdos. These did not represent the religion they were.
No, they wouldn't even engage in conversation.
Yet they would say so about Christian or Hindu or any other.
We could discuss it at any level of depth, take any amount of time. But when it came to discussing Islamic terrorism, it was, oh, there's a squirrel. Oh, gee, it's lunchtime. Guys, okay, well, come back tomorrow. We'll talk about Buddhists blowing things up. They refused. And then I also discovered there was absolutely, the faculty were terrified of discussing Islamic terrorism. And then on top of that,
why?
What I discovered was there were people on the course that were there purely to monitor the course, and they would complain immediately to the faculty the moment anyone discussed ISIS, and the moment anyone discussed anything related to Islamic ideology that relevant to the course.
So they were self-censoring, is what you're saying.
Yes, and there were at that time three people, very loud. One was a housewife, one was a geography student, and another was a retired accountant. Three Muslims that were constantly monitoring. And then one of the course administrators was a Muslim. And then what happened was Raqqa fell. At that time, I believe the forces took Raqqa, which was the capital of ISIS, and a number of documents were liberated and were published. At that time, I had access to these. And I had access to these documents. It's now behind a paywall, but I no longer have access to them. And I actually started discussing them. I started posting them on the forum, and they started showing from these documents that these were standard Orthodox Sunni Muslims, and that these were standard Orthodox Sunni beliefs. There was nothing radical about them. And when I posted those documents, I was banned the very next day.
Banned from your job, banned from your course, banned from what?
Banned from the course. Well, I was still allowed if I wanted to complete the course, but I was not allowed any interaction. I was not allowed any communication. I was banned from any dialogue, and I was taken off the forum. So I was told that I had nothing to say. That there was nothing that I could say. But and these were the documents captured by the military. I simply posted the list of books and what their beliefs were and their motivations, the speeches.
That almost parallels exactly what happened to me in Britain when I was there from 1992 to 2017, 25 years. And for the first 10 or 15 years, whenever there was a debate on a university campus, the Christian Union would always be challenged to the debate by the Islamic Society. They would call me in to do the debates because I was the only one that knew the material. It was fine to begin with in the 1990s, but after 9/11, almost the day after 9/11, suddenly I was not permitted to say anything that violence had anything to do with Islam. I was thrown out of universities, and then by 2010, I could not get onto any universities. I was an Islamophobe, a hate preacher, because I dared to say that much of this violence you can find in the Quran, you can find in the Prophet's own example. So what you found in the security field, I found in the academic field.
This was at university. This was in academia, in a European university.
Yeah. Okay, so it's rampant all over, but not just in Britain. It's what country were you in at this time when you did your study?
This was in Holland. Right now I live in Poland.
This is in Holland that this is going on. Probably not the same problem in Poland that you found in Holland. Am I guessing? Right, correct?
No, fortunately not.
All right, so you have a lot more freedom to say what you want to in Poland, unlike in Holland or Germany or Britain or France. So, okay, that's a little background. Now, you were interested in then really digging down into the ideology. When did you get into the historical critique, looking at the history of Islam?
So, what was very interesting was within the documents that were taken from ISIS, there were two things that I posted that really caused offense. One was a contract of dimitude. a demi contract.
Define dimitude for the people who are listening. Protection.
A demi would be defined. A demi is effectively, under Islamic law, a prisoner of war.
Okay. The word itself, though, means to be protected. It's considered to be a protected of those who are not Muslims.
It's a euphemism. Islam is full of wonderful euphemisms that don't that it's a euphemism. Let's say you're a prisoner of war. For all practical purposes, you're a prisoner of war, and it's a document that you sign that you will abide by the rules, or you will be treated as a enemy combatant. This is really what it comes down to. And I published this document, and I looked at the idea of the Pact of Umar, or the ideas, and this went into extensive detail. So from there, I started to look at the historical applications of this, and I found they were identical.
Okay. Before you go on, define the Pact of Umar. Some people will not know what you're talking about.
So this is simply a list of rules by which you will abide as a non-Muslim living under Islamic
Umar? Rule. Which Umar are you referring to here?
This would be the Caliph Umar. So this would be the Caliph Umar that followed after Muhammad. So he's one of the 4 rightly guided caliphs.
Abu Bakr Umar, 634 to 644, the 10-year period, Umar living there in Medina. This is what the Islamic traditions tell us, this Umar.
Correct. So it's colloquially termed Pact of Umar, but so this is the contract of dimitude, and this was essentially identical to what had been happening historically. And I realized this was very interesting, and I wanted to know, and then I discovered another document within that was very, very popular amongst the ISIS troops, ones that they studied, ones that they learned, and this was an actual Sharia manual. Now, the word Sharia is thrown around a lot, and I realized, wait, for instance, Muslims want Sharia for Britain, they want Sharia for America, they want to live under Sharia law. And everyone seems to think that Sharia is just verses of the Quran, but actually it is far more extensive. If you ask yourself the question, Islam is a religion of law, then we need to ask ourselves, what are its laws? It has a full legal system, it has a full political system. So the Sharia is this legal and political system written down, just like you have the Constitution and you have laws in the United States. So therefore, the Sharia is a replacement legal system for this, a replacement political system for this. And the one book that was the most commonly used, there were numerous, but the one that was the most accessible and the most commonly used was one called The Reliance of the Traveler, or the Umdat al-Salik. And I started to study this extensively. And when I published that, when I put that on the forum, along with the admins, the monitors, the hall monitors, the Korans in the university forum went insane.
Yeah. Okay. Now, obviously, for those of you who are, for many people, they won't see the significance of what Lloyd's saying. Most of us have grown up in the West, where we separate church and state because of the Christian ideal, because of the fact we live in the memory of a Christian environment. The state has its directives, the church has its directives, and neither of the twain should meet. Christ said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, give to God what belongs to God, which has created and set the model that we all use in the West. In Islam, they don't have that model. The mosque and the state are melded together as a theological entity. So a Muslim, what they do politically is a religious act. What they do in a context of war is a religious act. What they do when they go to the mosque is a religious act. Well, how they dress, walk, talk, eat, sleep is a religious act. So what Lloyd's saying is this idea that the whole dimitude and the laws that are in the principles that were created by Umar, which is modeled by Muhammad, these are all religious acts. It is not something that they separate. It is something that is dictated by God. Therefore, it cannot be questioned. Therefore, it cannot be critiqued. It must be obeyed. A Muslim is someone who obeys what they obey, this law. That's why Sharia law is, you would say, Lloyd, is probably, it is almost sacrosanct, isn't it?
Sharia underpins Islam. It encompasses Islam. It is the final product. It is the synthesis of the Quran, the Sunnah, and all of the thought of the Islamic jurists through the ages. And the Sharia is the final product. It is not only the final product of all of the literature of Islam, all of the actions, everything taken together has led to the Sharia, and the Sharia is the final agenda of the Ummah.
Okay, now how long have you been working on this Sharia material?
Probably, I'd say about 7 years now. since
years. So this has
2015.
been a real passion of yours, and what we're going to be getting from you in the episodes that follow are the result of these 7 years of research.
Yes.
Okay. Now, before we get into that, and we're not going to start with that on this episode. This is just to introduce you to the people on PfanderFilm. I want to ask them more general questions just to see where you stand on the historical critique. Do you, Lloyd, do you think there was a man named Muhammad who was born in Mecca, lived there for 52 years before he moved to Medina? Do you believe that there was a Mecca that exists? Do you believe he did receive a Quran between 610 and 632? This is the Standard Islamic Narrative. Do you believe those three facts?
I believe the Standard Narrative is false. There may be a grain of truth to it. That is certainly quite probable. However, I do believe Muhammad is a composite of one or more two or more characters. Okay. I believe the dates are questionable. I believe the events are embellished. And as we go through the Sharia, I will also explicitly show how Sharia requires Muslims to embellish. It requires them to prettify, to beautify, to improve upon stories. You will see this as explicit in the Sharia law. It requires this. So they have to do this. And so, yes, I don't think the Islamic narrative as received is true. I do think there may have been one or more people. In fact, it's probable they took some person that perhaps had a legal background, some person that had as a military leader, someone who sort of had maybe visions, and they kind of mashed them all together. And I can even show that, as we will see, as we go through, you'll find there are numerous influences within Islam. We can go back well before the 7th century, and we can find numerous influences where Islam is drawn from. And I will show you one where there's certain striking parallels with a certain pagan Gnostic as well from Greece. So we'll find that they've taken ideas, they've absorbed ideas from many, many different sources, and they've combined them. So I do think
when you say they, are you talking about they who live in Mecca and Medina, Hijaz, central part of Arabia, or would these people have lived much further north?
Sharia law, almost certainly. So the Sharia, now I know that everyone's going to go, but Sharia means law. No, it doesn't. It has a completely different meaning, but it's taken to mean law. And the Muslim scholars commonly say Sharia law when they mean fiqh. There's a distinction. However, if you go back in history to the first millennium up to the 4th century, you'll find some antecedents to what we call the Sharia today within Yemen. Right? You can go back politically and legally within Yemen. However, according to the scholarly view, Iraq, that area, so the east, is where Sharia was established, the fundamental bases, and it's derived largely from, not exclusively from, but largely from the Jewish Talmud. So you're looking at a synthesis of the Jewish Talmud and, of course, the seminaries and you're looking at around Baghdad, Iraq, Kufa, and so on.
Okay, so this is much further north. In some ways, it's not really that important where we place it because, as you well know, and as the Standard Islamic Narrative tells us, the 4 laws of fiqh, the Safi, the Maliki, the Hanbali, the Hanafi, these 4 schools only begin to appear in the 9th century anyways. And they do appear much further north, not down in the south. So
the majority of the scholars are certainly there.
Yeah, and the Standard Islamic Narrative agrees with that. So we're not disputing that. Obviously, the historical critique that most of us are working on, the Sin-Sifters, those of us who are sifting the material, as we're going to do with you, we're going to stick through this this material that you have come up with, the Sharia, the 4 laws of fiqh, and we're going to see what comes out. We're going to see where it comes from. We're going to see exactly when it was put together and who put it together and why. So I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be fun. Lloyd, listen, terrific to have you on board. You're a completely new face for us. You're a completely new set of ideas for us. You're arguing a whole category that none of us have really talked about, and that is looking at the other structure, not the theological structure of Islam, the whole political and law of Islam, where it came from, and hugely important, as we've seen, because it is as important as the theology and as the revelation itself. So this will be fun, unpacking it, fun, looking and see your looking and picking your mind, so to speak, to try to find out where we can use this and how we can use this and how Muslims will deal with it. We're going to have to leave here at this point. I want to just thank you because you're the one that actually contacted me. I've had many other people say, you've got to get Lloyd on board. This guy, he's going to blow open everything we've known about Shariah law. So I'm hoping that'll be the case. Nonetheless, it's going to take some time. So we're going to do a series of episodes just to warn the people who are here. We keep episodes to 20 to 30 minutes. All of you listening to what Lloyd's going to be saying, do comment. You've got the comment box right there at the bottom. Let's hear what your comeback is. Let's see if you agree with what Lloyd's saying. And if you don't, then say so. And Lloyd will be looking at your comments. I'm going to give his YouTube channel. Here it is right here. I'm just putting it again, Lloyd DeJongh, and you can see the URL. Go to his channel. How many videos do you think you would say, estimate you have on your channel now?
Well over 100.
Well over 100. Okay. And make sure you subscribe to his channel. Lloyd DeJongh, just put that in there. You can see it there. It's written down below. Put it in there in the YouTube box, and it'll take you right to it. And listen, do sit and subscribe, but do respond. We want to hear a response. We want the discussion to carry on. Thanks, Lloyd, for coming on board. Thanks for helping us to understand this side of Islam that many of us don't. This is Lloyd.
Thank you, Jay. It's an honor.
Lloyd in Poland. I'm here in the United States, thousands of miles apart. We can almost shake hands. It seems like with Zoom. It's great to have this technology. God bless you all. This is Jay and Lloyd, over and out.